Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Bitter Pill. I am going to delay for a few minutes to get some other things ready and give people a chance to come into the stream. But today's topic is how, amidst the violent crackdown on campus protests, we're getting endless excuses for that, and clueless takes are basically just a complete lack of perspective on what it is that the students are protesting and protests in the past and so forth. So anyway, I will see you at 12:15. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So, today I'm going to talk about some recent events in terms of police and counter protester violence against campus demonstrators. I'm going to talk about some of the really just moronic takes of establishment figures and their various bootlickers on the protests, and kind of bring some perspective that sheds light on how ridiculous these attacks on the protesters are. And then I'm going to finish up with talking about uh, just how this movement is spreading and attracting gestures of solidarity from various places all around the world. So let's start with a look at what all's been happening. Last time, if you were watching, I talked about some of the violence by police against the protest in St. Louis, where we saw cops assaulting people, including presidential candidate Jill Stein, with bikes, um, basically battering them with them and brutally arresting them otherwise. And I think over 100 people, including Jill Stein, were arrested there. And one of the people arrested there was a professor, Steve Tamari, who basically suffered life-threatening levels of violence from the police. So his wife says, "My husband, Professor Steve Tamari, is out of the hospital. He will need surgery on his hand, and he is in pain from 9 broken ribs." Imagine that, 9 broken ribs. I've had a couple at once before, and it was just excruciatingly painful. I could barely get out of bed. I couldn't sleep normally, etc. Anyway, she says, "We are asking for time to rest and heal. We will not be taking media interviews at this time. Here's Steve's statement and ways you can support." So Dr. Tamari says, "My name is Steve Tamari, and I'm a professor of history at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville." That's why he's one of those outside agitators, quote unquote, that the pro-Israel people are always complaining about. I mean, if I taught at a university nearby and there wasn't a protest at my campus, I certainly would travel to St. Louis for a protest. I've traveled all the way to Washington, D.C. for a protest. So I guess, hey, I'm an outside agitator. Anyway, he says, "On Saturday, I was at the demonstration on the campus of Washington University in St. Louis, where hundreds of Washington University students, professors, and community members demanded that Washington University divest from Israel and cut ties with Boeing, which supplies weapons such as fighter jets used to kill over 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza, not to mention in the West Bank. Over the last 7 months, I've been in agony watching my people in Palestine be slaughtered with U.S. bombs and funding. I joined the student-led protest on Saturday to stop this genocide and support and protect the students. Washington University met the peaceful presentation of student demands to divest from Israel by rejecting all student efforts to dialogue and negotiate. Instead, Washington University administrators called in the police. Armed with batons and wielding bicycles like battering rams, police forces from around the metro area crushed a gathering of students and concerned citizens pressing for an end to American complicity in the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. I was body slammed and crushed by the weight of several St. Louis County police officers and then dragged across campus by the police." As a result of police brutality, I'm now in a hospital with multiple broken ribs and a broken hand. One doctor told me I am lucky to be alive. My lungs could have been punctured and I could have died on the ground as they abused me. And if I remember correctly, maybe I'm thinking of somebody else that this happened to. He was left there without medical attention for a bit. Uh, I guess I am thinking of somebody else, but anyway, that's happened. My ordeal, however, is a small price to pay for Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza, aided and abetted by the U.S. government, the military, and the political elite of both the Democratic and Republican parties, and most outrageously, institutions of higher education like Washington University, which give lip service to the principles of freedom of speech. Campuses are supposed to be a bastion of that, college campuses, while they trample anything that might rattle the military industrial complex to which they are so beholden. Meanwhile, all 12 of Gaza's universities have been destroyed. 94 academics, scientists, and intellectuals have been targeted and killed in airstrikes. Thousands of students have had their lives and careers cut short. Keep your eyes on Gaza. Follow the lead of our multiracial, multi-faith, intergenerational coalition of students, faculty, and community members who have taught us that the status quo on campuses and well beyond is not tenable. The students are our collective best hope for an end to wanton violence, a more humane future, and a free Palestine. Well, that's a great statement, and it kind of sums up a lot of what I wanted to talk about, because it really puts into perspective the contrast between these ridiculous criticisms of the campus protests, which we'll cover in more detail shortly, and what they're not comparing them to what's happening in Gaza that is the reason for the protests and elsewhere in Palestine. So I thought that was an excellent statement, and best wishes to him. Just sad how people are being treated for merely protesting for justice. Okay, let me plug in my Ethernet cable here in case my wireless goes haywire, like I think it did the other day. Okay. Meanwhile, this just in from University of North Carolina, which was one of the first campuses to have a student encampment. So you see there are police officers brutalizing students who were protesting. Not sure if anybody was seriously injured in this, but I wouldn't be surprised. In addition, University of North Carolina was a scene of violent counter-protesters assaulting students, kicking them and punching them and so forth. Just ridiculous. And of course, as you've probably heard, that happened at UCLA. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time on what happened at UCLA, but let me just talk about a few other things first. Oh, I think I forgot to mention the other day that the violence by the New York NYPD against Columbia protesters who occupied an administration building on campus, Hind Hall, and they put people in the hospital, 15 people in a hospital due to beatings and perhaps tear gas and various other assaults on them. And the response by the Columbia administration to this takeover of an administration building, not only was calling in the thugs, but also threatening to expel all the students involved. Meanwhile, you may recall back in January, two Columbia students who are uh, reservists in the IDF, the Israeli occupation force, assaulted students at Columbia, who were doing a protest that wasn't an encampment at the time, with uh, something called skunk spray, which is a very nasty chemical. I'm not sure what the composition of it is, but it caused 15 students to have to go to the hospital, and several of them have suffered long-term effects that persisted for weeks, if not months. Layla here is one of them. Another thing that's happened in these assaults on free speech at college campuses across the US is that journalists have been assaulted and arrested as well. So, two Dartmouth journalists were arrested merely because they were reporting on the campus protests. Uh, and at Columbia, they basically just banned journalists from being on campus when the cops went in to evict protesters from uh, what they had renamed Hind Hall, the administration building at Columbia. Hind, of course, is the first name of a little Palestinian girl, 6-year-old Palestinian girl, whose entire family, while they were traveling in a car, were, in addition to people who tried to help them, paramedics, were brutally assassinated by the IDF. Another uh, illustration of our free country, you know, at work is at the State University of New York in New Platts, where cops wielded batons and um, canines to attack and arrest protesters at the encampment. Drones and helicopters are flying above, so uh, you know, bit of overkill there for peaceful protesters. I haven't had a chance to listen to this interview yet. Another interview with Bryce Green from here at Indiana University, but definitely give it a watch. I'm sure he has lots of good things to say. Um, so maybe I'll cover that next time. Okay, now at UCLA, let me go to an earlier post. Uh, Yet another attack on student journalists. This one at UCLA, and this time it was not by the police, but by a mob of more than 100. I think I heard around 200 Zionist counter protesters attacked the encampment at UCLA. As she tried to break free, one UCLA student journalist said she was punched repeatedly in the chest and upper abdomen. Another student journalist was pushed to the ground and beaten and kicked for nearly a minute. And Oh, this is one I meant to show, but I didn't have it called up. I thought I had a short video clip of the assault by the counter protesters on the LA UCLA encampment, but I don't see it in my bookmarks here. So basically, I'll just kind of describe to you what happened. Basically, a mob of about 200 supporters of Israel just violently attacked the encampment there on the UCLA campus. And the cops just stood there and watched. They didn't do anything. They shot fireworks into the encampment. They tear gassed people or pepper sprayed them. I forget which. And they brutally physically assaulted them. So this person who was there at the time says, I am a Jewish student here at UCLA. Last night, over 100 people in our encampment were injured, including 25 people that had to go to the hospital. And again, this is an attack by a fascist pro-Israel mob, not the subsequent attack by the police. Jewish students from JVP Live, if not now, and other groups are in all of the encampments fighting for progressive Jewish values. Okay, so here's some video that I'll show you.
I am a Jewish student here at UCLA. Personally, I don't find any of the rhetoric here at the UCLA Palestine Solidarity encampment to be anti-Semitic. I joined this encampment because for me, never again is never again for anyone. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. So last night,
Okay, one thing I wanted to mention here. So some of the pro-Israel nuts have attacked this guy on the grounds that, oh, you're too young, your grandparents couldn't possibly have been Holocaust survivors. Well, you do the math. If someone, for whatever reason, because it's one of their later kids that have multiple kids, or because they just decided to have kids, past age 30, it's easily possible that this student's grandparents were, they would have been little kids, but it's entirely possible that they survived the Holocaust. So you Zionists need to work on your math. Okay, anyway.
When we were here at the UCLA Palestine Solidarity encampment, there was a group of aggressors that came from this side of the encampment and tried to breach the encampment. They were taking barriers, trying to pull them away. They were grabbing people from inside the encampment and pulling them out. There were threats of physical violence and actual physical violence. They were shooting fireworks into the encampment. They threw tear gas. They were macing people who were protecting the encampment. There were also people wielding metal rods, weapons, hitting people. Over 100 people in our encampment were injured, including 25 people that had to go to the hospital. I saw someone that had blood pouring from their head, and there were a few of our medic team that were attending to them. It was just a very scary experience. It is ridiculous that the university has said that they are committed to protecting its students, but yet nothing was done. We have dealt with harassment every single night, and then just last night they escalated and were being extremely physical, and this is something that we tend to see that the media does not like to report on, and it also doesn't just like to report on how genuinely very peaceful this encampment has been. We only just want the university to meet our demands. We're working tirelessly because Palestinians are suffering just an immense amount of violence. The violence that we saw in the encampment was just a tiny fraction of what they experience on the daily. 35,000 killed, over 2 million displaced. 1.6 million experiencing famine. That is unacceptable. And with my Jewish values, I find that completely unacceptable, and I will continue to work.
Yeah, powerful testimony from this student. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to make a comment on one thing he said about consistency with Jewish values. Now, I certainly don't know a lot about Judaism, but I know one thing for sure is that they do follow the Ten Commandments in the Jewish religion, supposedly. And two of the Ten Commandments, of course, are thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal. So meanwhile, we have a supposed bastion of Jewish values, the state of Israel, mass murdering tens of thousands of people. And of course, over its 75 plus year history, it's mass murdered tens of thousands more people. I'm sure well over 100,000 altogether, and stolen their property, driven millions of people off of their homes, stolen their homes, stolen their other property, and resources of collective resources such as water resources and so on and so forth. So it doesn't exactly sound like Israel is upholding Jewish values. This student is trying to do so. So just thought that was noteworthy. And a couple of people commented. This person, Tariq Kinney Shoah, and Ryan Grimm from the Intercept pointed out that this violent attack by the pro-Israel mob that took place, a few days ago, took place with the cops right there, watching, and they did nothing. So clearly, I mean, the cops obviously are acting at the behest of the UCLA administration. So clearly, their claim that they are doing all this, and the claims of college administrations throughout the country that they are doing this to protect the safety of Jewish students or anybody else on campus is just a bunch of lies, because they did nothing to pro-Israel counter-protesters who have attacked various demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations around the country, including this case where the cops just sat there and watched as there was this violent attack by more than 100 Zionists on the UCLA encampment. And so, as Ryan says, last night they followed up on the violent pro-Israel mob attack by attacking the encampment themselves, including shooting rubber bullets at these entirely peaceful protesters. And some of the idiots who criticize the protesters are like, but they vandalized. I think it was at USC. They vandalized a statue, Tommy Trojan or whatever it's called, at USC. Well, what they did was they put a Palestinian flag with the statue, and they wrote some graffiti on it, presumably with not with permanent ink or anything. But somehow that's a worse thing, or even maybe violence, than these physical attacks by the protesters and then later the cops. And by the way, if you don't know anything about rubber bullets, which were also used on protesters during the Black Lives Matter protests back in 2020, they can kill you. and they can cause really bad injuries. They can break your arm or break your leg, wreak havoc. Maybe not as much as an actual non-rubber coated bullet, but certainly significant physical damage. And cops shot at UCLA student protesters with rubber bullets, as well as, of course, beating them up, tear gassing them, and so on. So now let's talk about what some of the idiots in the political establishment have had to say about all this. So here's Fareed Zakaria, Washington Post columnist and CNN commentator. Why has the Gaza war spun colleges into chaos? Because campuses have weakened as actual communities where people mingle, interact, and get to know and trust each other. So my response was, you morons will come up with any reason other than the one that's patently obvious to anyone with a lick of common sense who's been watching what's going on. People don't like seeing huge numbers of innocent people being killed, especially when we're funding it against our will. So, of course, college students' tuition money is used by universities to invest in various corporations, many of which do business in some way with Israel, or they actually invest in the Israeli government, invest in bonds or whatever. But Fareed is sure that the protest couldn't possibly be happening for obvious natural reasons. It must be because campuses have weakened as actual communities, and any of us who've visited these solidarity encampments on various college campuses can see the community that people have there. And I'm sorry, he's just an idiot. Here's another clueless soul, not a member of the elite in this case, but just some random bootlicker. If they are proud of what they are doing, why wear a mask? All future employers are going to see these images, so will their neighbors and family. This is reality. This is consequences. And he's referring to when the UCLA cops arrested protesters, they took off their masks, which some of them may have been wearing N95 masks to protect themselves from COVID, even though it's outdoors. They're in enclosed areas, and some people are immunocompromised or whatever. But yeah, of course, the majority of students wearing masks are doing that to conceal their identity, because there could be consequences for them if they're identified. And as someone pointed out to this guy, hey, what about your profile picture, dude? Your profile picture is a masked comic book character. Show us your real face if you're so proud of what you're saying. But the other point is, the UCLA mob, outside agitators, you could say, who attacked the UCLA encampments. Many of them were wearing masks too, and of course, white supremacists in general, often wear masks or hoods or whatever to conceal their identity. You don't see cops removing the masks from the violent counter protesters or doing anything to them. In fact, I don't have it bookmarked, but I just saw this morning a photo of the cops shaking hands with the Zionist mob at UCLA. The New York Post has certainly had some doozies in terms of just idiotic takes on the protests. So this, I haven't read the article, but you can imagine, I'm sure. COVID shutdowns and isolation to blame for pro-Palestine protests, experts say. What can you say about something that utterly clueless? Nancy Pelosi, on the other hand, thinks that pro-Palestinian protests are, backed by Putin and Russia, and they're pro-Kremlin agitators. Shoot, I for some reason didn't have it bookmarked, but okay, sorry. There's Glenn Greenwald's post about Pelosi. I wish I had it bookmarked. I don't, but there was another, even more absurd article in the New York Post where basically the claim was that people were protesting on college campuses. College students were protesting because they weren't getting enough sex. And I'm totally serious. Somebody at the New York Post quoting some moron who's a professor at Columbia or NYU, I forget which, who made that claim. So, yeah. I'm speechless at the stupidity of these people, or maybe they think we're that stupid that we would actually take such claims seriously, or I don't know, just unbelievable. Here's more gems from the New York Post. This one says George Soros is paying student radicals who are fueling nationwide explosion of Israel-hating protests. First of all, George Soros himself is Jewish, as are many of the protesters. And how much? There's no evidence that any of the student activists are being paid, certainly, for their activism. And how much does it cost to set up an encampment? You need to have tents, and you need to have food, which you would be buying anyway, and so on and so forth. But it's not that much stuff, and some pro-Israel people have commented to the effect of, "How come they've all got identical or similar looking tents? Somebody, Soros must be paying for that, or somebody must be paying for that." No, of course, most of the tents are small tents that you could buy at Walmart or from Amazon or whatever that are quite cheap. And I don't know about you, but when I was a college student or a grad student, I didn't have a lot of money. I lived off of my stipend as a grad student, or student loans, or money I got from my parents when I was in undergrad. It wasn't much money, but I could go out and buy a tent. Come on, this is crazy. And this is maybe my favorite. Nicholas Christakis, who's a professor at Yale, close to Columbia, said one cannot disrupt the ability of one's fellow students to take exams or graduate with impunity. It's common courtesy and common sense. Such imposition of costs on one's fellows is not free expression. So, how exactly is compared to the space that they're in, university quads or meadows or whatever, that the tents and protesters occupy a tiny part of, typically near some administration building, or in IU's case, outside the Indiana Memorial Union Student Union building. How's that disrupting anything? I mean, if you watched my video the other day, you saw me walking around the encampment. Sidewalks were unobstructed. It was a big open field. I don't know how many acres, but pretty darn big. And the encampment takes up a small part of that. Well, I guess actually this tweet is referring to the occupation of the Columbia Administration Building, which I forgot what the official name of it is, but the students renamed it Hines Hall after Hines, the student, the young girl in Palestine who was killed along with her family in a brutal massacre. And that same exact administration building, Hamilton Hall, I think it was. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. What was also occupied by protesters during the anti-apartheid movement in the 1980s, as administration buildings were at campuses all around the country. It was occupied during the Vietnam War, as administration buildings were all over the country. Classes typically are not held in administration buildings, so this notion that this was disrupting classes is ludicrous. And yeah, of course, as you probably are aware, the students themselves, are still going to classes and taking exams, and if they're allowed to, they're seniors, they'll graduate. They're not trying to disrupt themselves and other students' ability to take exams or go to class or attend graduation. They're just having a protest, and so he elaborates here. The allegation is that they are making noise, and as people pointed out to him, they're nowhere near any classroom buildings. They're not that noisy. And I mentioned to you one of my videos the other day that the noise was much louder from the counter protesters at the IU encampment when they were blasting loud music. Not that they were doing that day and night, so I guess you would give them a little bit of credit for that. But they were much louder than the protesters ever were. And the irony is that this professor, Nicholas Christakis, has done research. Like, his research area, he's a sociology professor, is on how ideas go viral, essentially. He studies social networks and how information is transmitted through social networks and so on and so forth. Actual activists such as a fellow I know, Wayne Shung, the leader of or co-founder of the animal rights group Direct Action Everywhere, have referenced Nicholas Christakis' work as part of the rationale for their attempts to disrupt the status quo through protests, which, as other scholars have pointed out, is like disrupting things, that not allowing business as usual to go on, making a spectacle and drawing attention to what's going on. And in addition, as these protesters are certainly doing, where despite being repeatedly arrested and beaten and so forth, they students keep coming back to protest some more. The determination they show also brings attention to their cause and conveys the information, hey, we're serious about this and you should take it seriously too. Anyway, Christakis basically understands perfectly well, because that's his research, how ideas go viral. And here he is criticizing students for doing what it takes, having a very highly visible and persistent protest, where people can stop by 24/7 and get information, and then convey it to others. He's criticizing them for doing what his own research would imply is a perfectly natural thing for them to do. Here's one of those idiots I was telling you about, thinking it's somehow suspicious that tents at various places are similar to each other. Somebody who doesn't understand how capitalism works, like you go to any Walmart in the country and you can find the same exact tents or whatever the case may be at every single store. So these people are, they're not very bright, some of them. Okay, well, let's see what the head honcho of Zionists in the U.S., Joe Biden, had to say about all this. So a statement from Deputy Press Secretary Andrew Bass says, President Biden has stood against repugnant anti-Semitic smears and violent rhetoric his entire life. He condemns the use of the term intifada, as he has the other tragic and dangerous hate speech displayed in recent days. President Biden respects the right to free expression, but protests must be peaceful and lawful. Forcibly taking over buildings is not peaceful. It is wrong, and hate speech and hate symbols have no place in America. Well, I mean, first of all, again, Genocide Joe, many of the protesters are in fact Jewish themselves. They're not issuing anti-Semitic smears. The violent and racist rhetoric, such as people saying, uttering racial epithets and telling people, I hope you get raped, as somebody said to, a Zionist said to Medea Benjamin recently. That's all coming from the pro-Israel side. Vast majority, even in cases where college administrations have used supposed anti-Semitic smears or violent anti-Semitic rhetoric as a justification for the crackdown on the protesters. It turns out Jewish counter-protesters are the ones who said those things to try and frame the protesters. That happened at Northeastern University, as I talked about the other day. He condemns the use of the term intifada, as has the other tragic and dangerous hate speech displayed in recent days, such as from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's hate speech, according to Joe Biden and the majority of are thoroughly bought off Congress. And the term intifada literally just means shaking off, and it's used as a term by, it's an Arabic term that's a reference to any sort of uprising or protest, regardless of whether or not there's violence involved. Of course, the term intifada is also used to describe uprisings that do involve violence, such as the Warsaw Ghetto intifada, Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So it's just total ignorance. Now, I guess you could argue that because people don't actually know what the term intifada means in countries where Arabic is a very rarely used language, you could make the argument, you could make the case that maybe the protesters shouldn't be chanting slogans that have the word intifada in them, just because that can be misunderstood and is deliberately or out of ignorance attacked as quote unquote hate speech by folks like Joe Biden. But I don't know. I'm not sure what you guys think. Should protests use the term intifada as part of slogans? I think even though maybe there's been even more controversy about the term from the chant "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which was actually explicitly condemned as anti-Semitic in a congressional resolution passed recently. I don't think there's any real debate to be had over whether there's anything wrong with that slogan. It's not. It's just a chant for Palestinian freedom. Intifada, maybe people can easily understand that. One thing I do think, though, that is arguably counterproductive is cases that have happened in a number of the pro-Palestinian protests or encampments where they have taken down the American flag at this or that college campus and run up a Palestinian flag instead. Now, of course, I'm certainly no flag waving patriot. I think that the symbolism attached to the American flag is at best very mixed. It's associated with a government that has violated human rights throughout its entire history in just really egregious ways, in the worst ways possible, such as genocide and slavery, and supporting genocidal violence in other countries as they're doing right now. At the same time, I can also understand the sentiment a lot of people have to claim the flag as representing decent values that a lot of Americans have, and representing a country that they love because this is their home. And I think that the protesters could capitalize on that sentiment and not say they're against the American flag or whatever, and point out that these Congress people and our government in general and university administrators who are doing the bidding of Israel, sending billions of dollars to Israel to perpetrate genocide against the Palestinian people, sending vast amounts of our tax dollars, even more tax money, to support the violent right-wing regime in Ukraine that the U.S. is using as a proxy to try and destabilize the Russian government. That certainly isn't patriotic what they're doing. I think it's treasonous. that these legislators are basically bought off by the lobby of a foreign government and doing that foreign government's bidding rather than serving the interests of their own people. And so, I think the protests could point that out and make a point of it. Just my 2 cents. What do you guys think? I'm not seeing any comments here. Usually at least one person comments. And what can I do to get you guys to comment? How about telling me where you're tuning in from? The 18 of you that I see listening right now. Where are you watching from? Anyway. Now, one thing that the protests have been criticized for is that they are calling for divestment of universities from businesses and corporations doing business with Israel in one way or another. And this tactic, it should be pointed out, has a long and proud tradition going back to the civil rights movement. Of course, the most famous example of boycotts during the civil rights movement was the Montgomery bus boycott, where protesters or civil rights activists walked to the store or work or school or whatever instead of riding the city buses in protest of the buses being segregated front versus back. But there were also a lot of boycotts of white-owned businesses that discriminated against Black people. So not only did people sit in at the lunch counters that were segregated, that wouldn't allow Black people to dine there, but they also boycotted those businesses, and that's a very effective tactic that is only natural for protesters to use these days. This is an image of a solidarity encampment at Columbia University, calling for divestment from South Africa during the protests against South African apartheid. And actually, I think the date on that was 1985. So they set up the encampment in spring 1985. It was left up, not bothered by the police or anything for a couple of months, I believe. And in the fall of 1985, Columbia divested from South Africa. So there's a long tradition of protesters using occupations or encampments to protest this or that injustice. Another idiotic perspective that establishment forces have taken on the protesters is they're comparing them to the January 6th riots. Now, to be sure, there have been cases where, for example, at Columbia, students broke windows on the administration, Hamilton Hall administration building in order to get inside so they could occupy it, and they used furniture to barricade the doors. So certainly there was property destruction involved, but there was not any violence by the protesters against people, nor has there been in any other campus protests that I'm aware of, other than perhaps students defending themselves against violent attacks by counter protesters or the police. January 6th, yeah, granted, some people have criticized those who've made a huge deal out of it by saying it was overblown, even though it was, attempt to overturn the results of the election. There wasn't a whole lot of violence associated with it. And, most of the protesters there were not, fascists or whatever. They were just people who believed the election was rigged. Still, it was an attempt to overturn the results of an election that, as far as we know, the votes were fairly counted in, and Biden won. Certainly, there's no legitimate comparison to be made between January 6th and the current wave of campus protests. Another thing that people have pointed out is that there's just this big double standard in terms of how these overwhelmingly peaceful campus protests in the United States are going, criticisms of them by the corporate media and government officials and so forth as being violent or anti-Semitic or whatever. And the tremendous support that the Hong Kong riots that took place back in 2019 received from the political establishment in this country, where they were portrayed as pro-democracy protesters, when in fact they were riots. The people involved were violent. They beat people up and so on and so forth. And yet, unlike in the United States, where a peaceful encampment or building occupation gets violently attacked and broken up by the police, in Hong Kong, basically the police there in Hong Kong, which of course is part of China, even though it's separately administered, the police were. They handled the protesters with relative kid gloves, and the only people they arrested were people who were being violent or harassing people, and so on and so forth. And the protesters were in Hong Kong were quite similar in their actions to the counter protesters who violently attacked the demonstration at UCLA. So just this extreme double standard in how the establishment views things happening in China versus things happening here. Or, furthermore, this fabricated claim that the Chinese government committed genocide in the Xinjiang province in Western China, which there's no evidence whatsoever occurred at all. There's not even really good evidence that the Chinese authorities were particularly repressive toward those who were engaged in violent insurgency in Western China. Islamic extremists backed by the U.S. government, who in many cases came from the same groups or were associated with the same groups as those in Syria and Iraq, ISIS and all of those. And the Chinese government just did what it had to do to make sure they were no longer a threat. They didn't really even crack down on them as violently as what the cops did at Columbia or UCLA or many other places. Excuse me. I'm not sure what's going on with my throat. Excuse me. Another double standard that people had pointed out is that people are saying, it's unacceptable for people to pitch tents in protest of what Israel's doing in Palestine. Meanwhile, at a lot of the same campuses, such as University of Wisconsin, where this person, Tyler Katzenberger, is complaining about tents being erected, people camp out there all the time for football tickets. At Duke University, where I attended college, people routinely camp out to get basketball tickets. Back when Mike Krzyzewski was a basketball coach there, they called the tent encampments Krzyzewskiville. And students camped out there all the time, and they would, like, some of them would, like, if they had classes or whatever they needed to do, they'd go to those and they'd come back and continue camping out. Nobody complained about that. But all of a sudden, if there's a protest involving people pitching tents, protest of this or that U.S. foreign policy, these people lose their minds. Lauren Boebert, right-wing congressperson, says, I get a strange inkling that all these Columbia and UCLA students running around yelling "Free Palestine" would not be jumping at the opportunity to do a semester abroad in Gaza. Well, gee, I wonder why that is, Lauren. Is it dangerous in Gaza, do you think? Well, why would that be? Who is perpetrating the violence in Gaza? Could it be the government that you support, you freaking Zionist asshole? And then the other thing is, well, it wouldn't be possible for students in the United States to do a semester abroad in Gaza because, Israel has demolished every university in Gaza. So meanwhile, back in the U.S., at some of the protests, there have been cases of students breaking windows, to get into a building or something like that. Meanwhile, Israel has blown up entire universities. In fact, every single university in Gaza has literally been demolished by the Israeli government. And so have hundreds of schools, so have hundreds of thousands of homes, so have about 1,000 mosques or churches, and just about every aspect of infrastructure in Gaza has been obliterated by the Israeli government. So some Zionist idiot says, here's what the front of UCLA's Royce Hall looks like now as the encampment gets cleared out. So a number of pictures of graffiti and signs there. Gosh, that's just really terrible. But meanwhile, as Nora Barris-Friedman from Electronic Intifada points out, here's what Khan Yunis looks like now after 7 months of genocide. Okay, so just endless hypocrisy. Sandy Johnson says, Britain, okay. Wow, across the pond. Wondering where other people are tuning in from. I know I've got some followers from China because I go on Jerry Gray's podcast for interviews sometimes. And I think the vast majority of people who watch this channel are in the United States, where I am, because most of my content deals with the U.S. in one way or another. But good to see you, Sandy. Glad you tuned in. So let me just close by talking about some of the support that the protests have received from various quarters. Supporter from Yemen. It says, greetings to everyone who came out trying to stop the genocide against the children and women of Gaza. Your voice is strong. Your voice is heard by the world. Your voice terrifies the criminals who kill children. Indeed. Here in Bloomington, Indiana, where I live, and the Indiana University campus, located in the heart of Bloomington, has an ongoing encampment. At least when I checked this morning, it was still up, despite 2 police raids. There's more tents than ever, and when I talked to some students there last night, when I was out walking my dog, which I've been walking my dog through campus and town a lot lately. They said the encampment was going to continue after the end of the semester, which is very good to hear. So hopefully it will persist for some time, and folks at other campuses will be. But anyway, I wanted to share with you that the Bloomington City Council passed a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The mayor vetoed it, and then the Bloomington City Council overrode the veto. Community members hold up signs reading "Let Gaza Live," override mayor's veto, and "Free Palestine" during a Bloomington City Council meeting on Wednesday, May 1st. Now, to be fair to the mayor, she did at least condemn the violence by the police against the encampments. But in any case, so the city government here is largely on the side of the Palestinian people. The American Civil Liberties Union here in Indiana is filing a lawsuit on behalf of protesters banned from Bloomington's campus, such as Bryce Green, the Indiana University grad student and commentator for or writer for Electronic Intifada, as well as Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, who was a key organizer of the encampment here at IU. Was banned from campus for 5 years versus the 1-year ban that was issued against many of the other students arrested by the police the other day. Or on a couple of occasions, I should say, at Bloomington's campus. So the ACLU says, our lawsuit contends that these bans are an unlawful prior restraint on the free speech rights of our plaintiffs, each of whom wants to rejoin the ongoing protests on campus. Since 1969, Dunn Meadow, which is the field next to the Indiana Memorial Union, where I've attended many a protest, including encampments over the 35 years I've been living in Bloomington. Since 1969, Dunn Meadow has been a public forum, a place for people to engage in First Amendment expression. IU cannot preemptively ban people from engaging in this protected expression by prohibiting them from entering Dunn Meadow for a year or more. The right to protest is a central pillar of the First Amendment, a value that has shaped this country since its founding and one that we will always defend. Okay, and I wanted to close with this. Certainly, people in Gaza, Palestinians themselves in Gaza, and other places in Palestine, are very much supportive of the protests taking place at American universities, or North American universities. So these are kids, in refugee camps in Gaza, holding up signs, thanking American and also Canadian students. McGill University is in Montreal, saying thanks for your solidarity. McGill University, Columbia University, Swarthmore College, University of Cincinnati, Yale, etc. So people in Palestine itself are, of course, saying more, please keep going to the protesters in the United States and elsewhere in the world. And these protests are spreading to college campuses throughout the world. I saw that there was one or several in France. I think Spain has some. Somewhere in Latin America, where was it? Argentina, which has a far-right government now, very much allied with Israel. Literally a fascist government, but these students there are protesting anyway and are grateful to the American protesters who kicked off the campus encampment phase of this movement. I don't know what's going to happen as the summer arrives and students are, for the most part, not on campus, or at least not on their campus. But I think that in one way or another, the protests will continue, just as they did, of course, during the Divest Now protests against South African apartheid in the 80s, when I was a grad student at Illinois, and we had massive protests there, or during the Vietnam War era, when when campuses were similarly a hotbed of activity with tent cities in support of the Vietnamese people's struggle for freedom. So let's keep it going, everybody. Solidarity to all the protesters at campuses throughout the United States and the rest of the world, and of course solidarity to the Palestinian people as they endure and also fight back against their oppression by the fascist Israeli regime. Okay, that's all for today. Please like and share and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I will see you next time.